Hello and welcome. I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and this time we're making a 1940s bra in a size 32 triple or quadruple D, and I'm giving out the pattern for free. This pattern is taken from an extant bra in my collection, and it's appropriate in shape for about from the late 30s to all the way to the early 60s. Bras or brassieres first started appearing in the Victorian era, but they didn't really gain popularity until the turn of the century, between the 19th and early 20th century, when the style of the corsets changed and you often needed more support in the bust area. And they became the standard for most women's wardrobes by the 19 teens. And at first, the styles were fairly rounded, and it was just to help create that support, that fashionable bust shape, but with very little support because most of the support came from the corset itself. But by the 1930s, corsets were not anymore worn on the daily basis by every woman. There were a lot of women who still kept on wearing the corsets. Were still standard up until the 1960s, but they weren't worn necessarily all day, every day by all women. So bras or brassieres started to become a lot more supportive. And during the 1930s, also the fashionable shape of the bust changed. In the beginning of this decade, it was fairly rounded and kind of a uniboob look, whereas by the end of the 1930s and all through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, the bust shape is separated, lifted, and natural. Basically, a really perky kind of peaked shape. Now, the shape of this bra is really common from that early 30s, and it is the height of fashion in the 40s. And it is seen throughout the 50s, but of course in the 1950s, the height of fashion, the most fashionable bust shape, of course, is that very extremely conical bullet bra kind of shape. And this is not that. The pattern I took is from an extant bra in my collection, like I said, and it is, of course, there is no sizing in it because if there ever was, it is faded, and bra cup sizes were slightly different back then anyways. But this is about a retail, not a specific high-end, like specialized in bigger bust sizes, but like a normal, like retail bra size, about a 32 triple or quadruple D, depending a little bit on the sizing and the shape of your bust, that which one this fits. But it fits me perfectly, and of course it's fairly easy to adjust from there with a little bit of adjustments, and a lot easier to work with than a lot of the bra patterns out there that are made for the standard about B to C cup, because this is already patterned for a bigger bust, so it translates for a bigger bust size a lot better than the smaller ones do. And though this is made for a 32 band width, my underbust is about 29 inches. It can be quite flexible because of the elastic in the back. So that will give you a lot of adjustability, and you could also easily just size up the band if you would prefer, or if your band size is much bigger than mine. The original bra is made out of a lace with zero bias give to it, and with a cotton sateen band on the bottom part to provide extra support for the cups. I did not include this because I don't necessarily need that, but you can always add a bit of an extra fabric for extra support on the bottom part of the cup, if you wish. And this pattern, like bras of this era, are always really made out of non-stretchy woven fabrics. And you definitely want to stick to a woven fabric when making this bra. But the amount of bias give, or the lack of any, will determine a lot what the shape of the bra is. If you use, like in the original, something that has zero or very, very little bias give to it, it will give you a fuller bust shape. Whereas if you use something with a lot of bias give in it, like the silk fabric that I'm using, it will give a minimizing effect to the bust. So you want to keep this in mind when you're doing this bra, but also if you choose to make the band out of the same material as the cups are made out of, if it has a lot of bias give, it's not going to be quite as supportive as out of something that doesn't have any bias give to it. So you want to keep that in mind, that how much support does your bust personally need, and make sure that you don't end up with a lot of pressure on the straps. That being said, bras of this era do provide a very different sort of support than what our modern bras do. Not only is the shape very different, but also like the feel of the bra. I don't feel as like supported as I do in a modern bra. It doesn't give me that same feeling. I feel more as if I wasn't wearing a bra, but it still does provide actual support and lift. And actually like jumping around and doing things like that would need normally an impact bra, those kind of things are actually a little bit more comfortable in this style of bra than they are with a modern regular bra. I'm providing the pattern for free. I'll link it down below. And it is, like I said, in my size. I didn't grade it in 2 different sizes, but feel free to try to grade it. It's not that difficult to work with. And especially for bigger busts, this will be a lot easier to work with than one of those standard BC cup bras, because those don't always translate for when you get much above a D cup, because of the difference in shape and size of the bust. This pattern doesn't come with seam allowance, simply because then you get to determine what kind of seam allowance you like to work with. Some people prefer to work with a bigger seam allowance and then cut it down as they have worked the seam so that then it will fold nicer. I personally prefer just working with a smaller seam allowance to begin with, but that's very much a personal preference thing, so that's why I didn't include the seam allowance, so that you can decide which kind of seam allowance you want to work with. And on that train of thought, this pattern is on my Ko-Fi shop, but it's for free. But if you do want to support me, I do have also regular buy me a coffee option on Ko-Fi, or I have memberships. The tiers have different sort of perks to them, and I'll be sharing more of the behind the scenes looks in those, and also there will be polls where you can affect what sort of things I'm going to be tackling next. So if you want to support me, go ahead and feel free to go into that link and choose whichever tier suits you. But if not, I totally understand that, and I would appreciate your support here too by just hitting that like button, because it really does help out with the algorithm. And if you haven't already subscribed, you could do that if you want to, because I would love to have you here all the time. As for sewing this bra, you can do it completely by machine. I did it with a mix of hand sewing and machine sewing, depending on which kind of sewing I found easier in that spot, because with a machine, there are several parts where it gets very tricky to not accidentally cause the shape to go all weird. But if you want to, you can totally completely hand sew this, or completely machine sew this, or do a mixture of both. So let's get to the sewing. I start by tracing out the pattern pieces from the original bra. The upper and the lower cup pieces are pinned and sewn together. Next, I trim down the seam allowance from the top cup by half and hand fell the seam down. Then I connect the 2 cups to each other. Then press the seam flat and cover it with bias binding.
Next, I ease the underbust band onto the lower cup. This can be helped by sewing a little gathering thread at the bottom of the lower cup. And then a strip of bias binding is sewn on to cover the raw edges. And then the side pieces are sewn onto the cup and band. And the raw edges covered with bias binding. Next, the upper and lower edges of the bra are bound with bias binding. If you have decided to line your bra instead of using a single layer, then you might want to fold them towards each other and then just sew them together. And so are the raw edges on the side pieces. Next, I measure the missing underbust length and add an elastic in that length. You can cut that in half and sew it onto both back pieces, or keep it as one whole piece and just connect the hooks to the other side piece. This was more commonly seen in the earlier bras, but I personally prefer it, so that's why I'm doing it. And lastly, we sew on straps. You can do modern straps with adjustable straps, or just ribbon straps like I'm doing here. And here is the finished bra. I don't think I've ever had a bra that does this good of a job at minimizing my bust, especially not without the uniboob. And as you can see, it's fairly supportive when I jump. Like, I do get bounce, but it's not too bad. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll enjoy the pattern. If you do decide to make it, I would be very happy if you tag me in the makes, because I would love to see your results. Till next time, bye!